Welcome to the Freebirth Podcast, a supportive space for people who are learning, exploring, and celebrating their autonomous choices in childbirth. Together, we'll unpack truths, share personal stories, and claim our ability to birth freely and intuitively. Here's your host, Emily Saldea.
There are many ways to interact with Freebirth Society. These include our incredible offering, The Complete Guide to Freebirth, which is the most comprehensive online course available on how to give birth in your power. We also have a beautiful Freebirth meditation program called the Sovereign Birth Meditation Series, designed to help you release your fears and actualize your dream birth. Our latest course is called Through the Veil, a profoundly personal, radical pregnancy companion program by Yolande Norris-Clark that offers the opportunity to travel with Yolande as she moves through the last trimester of her most recent pregnancy and invites you into her birth room to witness the birth of her 8th child. And if you're looking for a deeper connection and the opportunity for sisterhood in community with radical, like-minded women, the Freebirth Society private membership is for you, and you can apply on our website to become a member. We also offer personalized one-on-one transformational coaching with a focus on learning the tools to move out of victim consciousness and towards self-responsibility. Skills that translate to freedom, not only in the context of birth and mothering, but in every area of life. And finally, we are offering all of you, our amazing listeners, the free gift of Yolande's 20-minute birth affirmations audio recording, a gorgeous, soothing meditation that every pregnant mother should have. So just head on over to our website at freebirthsociety.com, sign up, and Yolande's affirmations will be sent directly to your inbox.
Hello, it's Yolande here, and I'm so excited to tell you about my latest endeavor with Freebirth Society. It's called Through the Veil, and it's an invitation for you to join me on the most profoundly intimate experience of my life and yours. The journey of moving through the birth process into the underworld of birth to be reborn as a new mother into a new family once again. Through the Veil is a very raw, very real third trimester, birth, and postpartum week-by-week program that includes 17 videos in which I discuss exactly how I prepare for my free birth, including so many of the messy, emotional, logistical, and relational issues that aren't often talked about in the conventional prenatal context. Through the Veil also includes the hour-plus long documentary of my 8th baby's birth, an incredibly loving, incredibly vulnerable, gritty, agonizing, naked, and beautiful family birth that I'm so proud of. I really look forward to you journeying with me through the veil.
I've got a special episode for you this week, as I am joined by Yolande Norris-Clark, my hero, dear friend, and partner in everything birth. She's joining us today to share the story of her most recent birth, her 8th child, and why this particular birth may not have actually been an entirely undisturbed or physiological birth. We're also thrilled to be sharing that we just released Yolande's newest creation, Through the Veil. So after you listen to this episode, be sure to head over to our website and get her course. Enjoy our conversation. Okay.
All right.
Woohoo!
1, 2.
1, 2, 3. Hey, girl.
Hey.
So I am excited to be doing this today. It's been how many weeks at the time of this recording since the birth of your latest child?
Oh my goodness, the birth of my latest child. 3 months, pretty much.
Oh my goodness.
Exactly.
Yeah, it was July, huh?
Yeah, almost exactly 3 months.
So we're here to ultimately share and discuss the beautiful story of your eighth child, and also there's some interesting. I think we're going to get into some interesting waters here. We were talking before we were recording that when you did share the announcement of your son's birth, you kind of announced that it was not indeed undisturbed, and that it was actually not a physiological birth. So I think a lot of people have curiosity about what that means and what happened, and I think that will kind of naturally segue into that conversation, which I think is important for you and I to have, because a lot of women who are really starting to open up to these concepts and critique these ideas are really looking to us to clarify, a lot of this stuff. What is free birth? What is undisturbed birth? What is physiological birth? And so I think it was really, an eyebrow raise for you to share that yours wasn't. And I don't even really know what that means yet. And then I also want to, invite you to speak and share about this incredible project you've been working on, where, of course, this birth and this pregnancy was interwoven into that. So where do you want to start? Do you want to talk a little bit about the project, or do you want to kind of just start from before this pregnancy and move on in, or what feels good to you?
Gosh, yeah, there's a lot. I think I want to start first of all by just saying that, one of my big commitments, one of the most important commitments, in my work in birth is just to tell the truth about birth. And that includes my own births as well. And that is also kind of what this project has been all about. And as you said, the project is interconnected with the birth experience that I had. So, Through the Veil is the project that we're referencing, and it's an online program for pregnant women, pregnant mothers, and it really follows my experience of the last trimester of my pregnancy, my most recent pregnancy, and the birth process, and also the experience of mothering during the immediate postpartum period. So that first week or two after my baby was born. And this is a project that I actually thought about doing. It's been on my mind for years and years. Actually, I think I mentioned when I was pregnant with Felix, who is now 7. So it's been a number of years that I've been thinking about doing this. And it was really prompted by an experience that I've had many times, which is, working with women as a coach, either through over Skype, distance wise, or even in person. And I think doing a pretty great job of, providing birth education and information and ideas about birth, but especially for first time mothers, not really being able to kind of explain on a more sort of emotive or emotional or visceral level what birth is really like. And I don't know if that's ever possible. I don't really think it is. I think you really do have to experience it. But you and I created our amazing program, The Complete Guide to Free Birth, which really is such an in-depth, deep dive into what physiological birth is and how birth works and the hormonal matrix of birth and all of that stuff. And of course, we do cover the emotional aspects of birth as well, but that's in a much more intellectual sense. And I wanted Through the Veil to allow mothers to really travel with me as I go through my preparations for birth. And, the fact of the matter is that I often don't follow my own advice. And, my life is messy and birth is scary and intimidating. And it's just really raw and real. And, there's no perfect way to do birth. And as you were saying before we started the recording, Emily, free birth is not this sort of gold standard that is the be all and end all. And, my first 2 birth experiences were very much attended. And I felt really emotionally reliant on the wise woman who sat with me during those first 2 births. And those experiences are really, I think, what allowed me to then go on and just have these very private family births that I have now. So I wanted to really give participants in the program a glimpse of what birth can really be like. And, on one hand, birth is completely unique, not only to every woman, but for every woman in each of her births as well. All 8 of my births have been totally different in many ways. But then on the other hand, we're mammals and we're animals, and birth works very similarly, not only among women, but even, across species. So, I think birth is always it's just full of paradoxes in every sense. And I wanted to try to impart that. So it was interesting, preparing for this birth of my 8th baby, and at the same time, kind of thinking about it as something that I was going to be able, be offering to other people. And it was a very, very difficult birth. It was a difficult lead up to the birth, and I'm still not totally sure why. And that was something that I thought about a lot. I had a lot of fear going into the birth process, and I'm still not really sure what I was afraid of. And I think one of the reasons I think I was able to kind of acknowledge that I had these fears that had no definition, no rhyme, no reason, is just because I have had so much experience in birth. I've had 8 babies of my own. I've had miscarriages. I've witnessed many births in other families, and I used to have specific fears, but I think I know so much about birth now that I'm not specifically afraid of any particular outcome or incident or eventuality. It's more that I can sort of see now that fear is just part of the process. And I don't think I need to assign that fear to any, particular outcome, just that it's kind of an inchoate, I think, maybe human thing. But yeah, I did, this birth was interesting too, because I got pregnant right after having a miscarriage. So almost 2 months after miscarrying. And we hadn't planned on becoming pregnant at that time. So the pregnancy that ended in a miscarriage was a bit of a surprise, although I I mean, I know that sex makes babies, so it wasn't that much of a surprise, I guess. um, but it was somewhat unexpected, I should say. And so after that miscarriage happened, at that point, I sort of thought, well, that's no fun. That's
Well,
terrible.
and I mean, and knowing you during that time, you were surprised, but then, wrapped your head around it. And in the early stages of your pregnancy, really came to love the pregnancy and really align with it and see how it could fit into your family. So then when it was, when it was lost, that you had already kind of integrated that and feeling, as I remember it, quite a bit of excitement about it.
That's exactly right. And my worries or concerns about being pregnant at first were really logistical. Like, how am I going to fit this into, all these kids and, work and businesses and all that stuff. And like you said, once I sort of fit the pieces together and figured that we could actually do this, it was going to be okay. When I miscarried, it was really heartbreaking. It was really heartbreaking. And, yeah, I had a hard time with that. Um,
What number miscarriage was that?
it was my 3rd miscarriage, and I miscarried. My very first pregnancy was a miscarriage, and then I had another miscarriage in there somewhere a few years.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, I think it's important to kind of just pause there and really remind the women that are listening to this that, miscarriage really comes with the territory with pregnancy. And you would be hard pressed to find a woman who's had, a handful of pregnancies that didn't experience a miscarriage. It's extremely common especially when you start getting into higher numbered pregnancies, like between 5 and 10, and beyond.
It is, yeah, and I'm sort of, giggling a little bit about it, and I don't want to sound flippant, which I think I just did a couple of times. But I do want to say that I think even for individual women, miscarriage can occur quite differently at different stages in our lives. So, my first miscarriage, which was my first pregnancy, was utterly devastating for me. I was I cried for weeks. It was one of the hardest things I had ever experienced. And I was, 19 years old at the time. So I hadn't experienced a heck of a lot, but it was incredibly hard. And, the miscarriage that I had a few years ago, I honestly don't even think I really registered it. It, there was a lot going on, and it happened, and then I kind of moved on fairly easily. And this previous miscarriage surprised me in that I was quite sad about it, but I also was able to integrate it fairly well into my life. And I think, well, actually, now that I say that, I think I did move on in quotes from the experience fairly quickly in a way, but as I was nearing the birth of our baby, after I got pregnant and went through my first and second trimesters, and life was a little nuts at that time, lots going on there too. I think it was as I neared the birth process of my most recent birth that I started to have some emotional stuff come up that I think maybe was related to the miscarriage. So I think some of the fear and apprehension and anxiety that I was feeling
Sure.
as I approached this birth had to do in part with the miscarriage and, just with this idea of loss in general. And, just recently, um, as I'm putting together the materials for Through the Veil, I've been looking over all of this footage that I took and editing our baby Ignatius's birth video. And that fear of loss, I think, was really at the forefront of my mind, not necessarily consciously, but especially in the birth itself. So maybe I should go back a little bit and just talk about how I was feeling a little bit more and what happened that initiated the birth. So, I'd been recording these videos every week that sort of tracked my emotional trajectory through the pregnancy. And, I talk a lot about practical things as well and, how I prepare for my birth processes. And, I think I think it's maybe easy to be an experienced mom and to have given birth quite a few times, especially with the experience recently of birth being really quite straightforward. So, our 3-year-old Xanthi, her birth 3 years ago was very, I want to kind of say easy and fairly fast, as were my previous 2 births too. So I was sort of gearing up for a birth that, to be honest, I was expecting to be as easy and fast and straightforward as my previous few births. And again, this is a perfect example of just not following my own advice, which is, one of the primary, directives going into birth is not to have any expectations. And, there I was, on one hand, feeling increasingly anxious and kind of stressed about this birth, but then also really fixated on almost the idea that it was definitely going to be very fast, and very easy. And that wasn't really the case. So another thing that was very hard for me to deal with, especially this time, was just the length of time that I gestate my babies. And so all of my previous children were born at around, well, between 42 and 44 weeks of pregnancy, which is long-ish, but it's not that long, and this is, again, something that I've been talking about and teaching about for so many years, and that's just that this whole idea of the due date is, really specious. It's not really based in any solid evidence. This whole epidemic of induction that we see in every hospital all over North America and really the world is founded in I think, really incorrect or misleading research, and that we should just totally throw out this whole idea of, birth timelines entirely, and be one with our bodies and
Right. And
let birth unfold as it should.
And because everything is so highly individualized, I've known plenty of women whose normal was to give birth at 36 weeks with all 5 of their children. And your normal is to give birth between 42 and 44. And so it's only really in the comparison, that we could even begin to put some sort of judgment of long or early on it, right? So sure, you're at the farther end, but your normal has provedly been 42 to 44. So that's just your normal
That's
as we
right.
know it.
Exactly. And one would think that having had so many babies, I would, pretty much have come to terms with that. But no, apparently not, because as I approached the 43-week mark during this pregnancy, I was just out of my mind. I mean, you know that because I called you and we Skyped and video chatted, and I was just, really kind of becoming untethered from, I don't know, sanity in a way, quite truly. But actually, I've thought more and more about that too, especially as I've, been editing all these videos for Through the Veil, and it's actually occurred to me more and more really recently that yes, it's true that on one hand, we want to just, accept the rhythm of our bodies and the timelines of birth, or try not to even conceptualize birth as being on a timeline. But then I think there's also something that really happens, which is that I think we're biologically designed to increasingly yearn for our babies. And I'm starting to think that maybe there's really something adaptive actually about going crazy at the end of pregnancy. I don't really mean going crazy, but about that sort of heightened level of anxiety, that heightened level of investment, really. So I think in some ways it's very, very normal for us to feel that way at the end of pregnancy.
Well, it's definitely
And
normal because we know that almost everyone feels it, right? So
that's right. But I guess what I'm trying to do is sort of in a way to sort of decouple that normal yearning and desire and intensity and emotional kind of ramping up from the cultural myths
yeah,
that are layered on top of
stress.
that, and
Yeah.
the stress and the negativity. But I did get really negative at the end of this pregnancy, and I feel, I don't know, not necessarily regretful, but um, I don't know. There's a sense of sort of wistfulness, and I do this to myself all the time. I'm so eager to give birth, but then there's also part of me that is already mourning the loss of
Hmm.
the pregnancy and missing being pregnant. And I definitely felt that too. I felt so conflicted and really mixed up at the end of my pregnancy. So, this
And
is another thing.
and I think, facing and navigating the waters of pregnancy after loss runs really deep, and um, nothing really confronts you with our total lack of control like death, right? It's just like at the heart of a unspoken, often, or even potentially unconscious element of pregnancy, and of looking towards the journey of birth, that and especially if there's an element of grieving, both from a previous pregnancy loss, but even the grieving of a current pregnancy, like you just mentioned, of kind of going through that rite of passage and no longer being pregnant. And it's just a lot. That's a lot of energy and of womanhood to navigate at one time. It's such a sensitive, vulnerable, delicate, intense, and rich and deep, kind of pulling of all these different worlds. And I think, I don't think we could talk about it enough, that carrying life also means to carry death, and the potential of that. And, having experienced miscarriages and some of that may be coming up. I think that that's just so obvious is the wrong word. It's like so rich, for such a deep experience. And not all of it can be conscious at one time, because you are also, having to be very in the world, right? And you have all these other children and you're preparing for another unknown, even though you've had 7 children, and that's why I love so much that you did this project Through the Veil, because you really put yourself out there and it's not all pretty and it's super, it's you. So it's really articulate and insightful and, intelligent, but it's also really vulnerable and very real and not in a exhibitionist kind of way at all. You really are creating this invitation, that in this cool, day and age where it could globally be, purchased and experienced, of this big sister, of someone who has been there and has had children and has figured lots of stuff out and is still kind of showing us that you don't get out of the work of pregnancy. You don't get out of, stepping into the unknown every single time. And you just display it and invite the viewers in such a just vulnerable, inspiring way. I'm excited for people to get to see it. And I really honor you for being willing and interested in putting it out there, because it's not all pretty, it's super real. And there's something that you offer to the world that, no one else is really offering, that this was your 8th child. And so there is a level of, like you've been working with pregnancy and birth and you're in your own journey since you were 19 years old. And so here you are at the birth of your 8th, and, that it was scary and that it was complex and that, like you said, there was kind of this element of, what's the right word? Kind of darkness or shadow work, it kind of rocked you. And that's not bad, that's just part of this crazy ass work of being a woman and being, an instrument of life, and that you're navigating the spirit realm and a large family. And it's a very, very, very cool thing. And I think it's going to give a lot of women a sense of companionship from this older sister, who's right there with you.
Yeah, thank you, and I hope it does. And I think what it really what recording the program and thinking about the program in the midst of my journey really did too was it almost illuminated for me that I'm also in many ways missing that sense of community. I think, even earlier in our conversation when we first started talking, I kind of dismissed, I think I said, yeah, I got over the miscarriage pretty quickly. But I actually didn't. And I think that did definitely inform the experience of leading up to my birth process and the birth itself. And even just my kind of the difficulty that I have in acknowledging the significance of that and how it played into the birth experience speaks to the fact that I'm also kind of missing that really close community of women. Now, I'm very lucky. I have it in many ways, but I think maybe not to the degree that we all would ideally have in our
who's
lives.
not craving that? Who's not talking about that? And and obviously that's what you and I are trying really hard to create virtually first, because we can access so many people, and then in the offline, create community of what we're building, and it is happening, and things like this are kind of this Through the Veil is like a bridge into the women that we can't be with, the women that we can't attend their births, and the women that we may never know are still going to get this beautiful wisdom and vulnerability and insight into an older sister who's going through it. So with that, let's kind of move into the days approaching Iggy's birth.
Yeah. So by the time I hit 43 weeks, I was just, and I think this is part of the process for everyone. I think this has to happen in order to release our babies. But, I was really just kind of an animal. I couldn't put any clothes on. I couldn't stand anything on my body. And luckily it was summer here in New Brunswick. So it's nice and warm out. But I really just kind of paced around and lay around and felt grumpy. But also, just alternately grumpy and weepy and a little just rough around the edges in all possible ways. So it was hard. And I think I was just afraid. I don't know why. I was just afraid of this birth and what it would bring. And so I woke up on the morning of 43 weeks and a day, and I had a huge cry, a huge sort of emotional breakdown. I'd been having quite a few of those, and my kids came in, and they were just so sweet to me throughout the whole pregnancy, and all five of our younger, all five of our older children have always been so much a part of my life in birth, when it comes to my own pregnancies, but also, the work that I would do for other women and other families in our community. My kids know where my birth bag is. They know what's in it. Um, so they're very well acquainted with every aspect of birth, from a kid's perspective. And, I remember my daughters coming in when I had my little breakdown that morning and just, snuggling me and being there to support me. And that means so much to me too, because, this is what they'll take. This is what they will understand of birth when they're older and having their own babies, if they choose to. Um, so yeah, I had this real breakdown. And then for the first time in weeks, actually, that morning, I I had this sort of catharsis, and then I felt a real clearing. I felt a real shift in kind of my attitude and my perspective, and I thought to myself, okay, this is fine. I'm like I just have to get on with my life, because all of this sort of sitting around and pondering and thinking about birth is just it's silly. I'm just wasting my time. And I had a bunch of pots to trim in our pottery studio, and I just decided that I would go out and get some work done. And I'd sort of been putting it off because I'd been having these intense sensations every single day for week after week after week. And so, every day I was sort of poised to have a baby any moment.
That's so intense. And that's normal, right? As the more babies you have, it just starts to feel like you can be in labor at the end for weeks.
Exactly. Yeah. And I always tell mothers, this is just part of the process. You are in your birth process from the moment you become pregnant. It's all, a continuum. Don't get yourself all worked up. Don't over dramatize everything. Calm yourself down, eat an orange and go have a nap or whatever. And, of course, again, following your own advice is almost impossible. And I'm just so ridiculously dramatic. It's unbearable.
Yeah, I want to speak to that really quick. Yes, you are. And I really see that as an expression of your wild woman. You are what one may call dramatic, but I don't, it's only that has this like social connotation of being extreme, or I don't know, or attention seeking or something like that. But why is any of that bad, right? Like, of course you're dramatic, especially at the end of a pregnancy, especially your eighth child, at 43 weeks. Like, who the hell would not be dramatic? And if you're listening to this and you're 43 weeks, please be dramatic. Like, I see it as a movement of energy. And like you said, you gave yourself the space to have a big emotional cry, and then you felt, renewed. And, that is a part of this. And that is, when I think about the wild woman, it's not someone like eating dirt in the bush. It's a woman who is willing to explore her edges and really find her own expression of chi, and the edges of what society says, to be tame in, and you don't do that, and it's awesome. I mean,
Thank you.
Challenging for your husband, maybe, but I'm sure he also absolutely adores the courage and vulnerability that it takes to go past the edges of social norms to be fucking dramatic. Like, that's That's awesome.
Thank you. Actually, you're absolutely right, and I think I have this tendency always to be self-deprecating and to kind of, oh, I'm just a little bit silly. But you're right. I think dramatic's maybe not the right word. I am expressive, and I am in touch with my
Well, it's like the Taking Back Birth movement. We'll take back dramatic.
There you go. Yeah, reclaim the drama.
Reclaim drama.
Yeah. No, that's true though. Yeah, dramatic isn't quite right, but yeah, no, I let it out. I am entirely who I am, and I have said that thousands of times before that when women are given the space to give birth in the peace and safety of their homes, when they're surrounded by people who trust them and love them, then they are able to fully express themselves. And yeah, I am entirely who I am in the birth process. And I'm proud actually of how I give birth. And that may sound strange because it's not something that one deliberately does, but I think in saying that, I'm really saying that I'm proud of who I am. I think I'm a truthful, heartfelt person, and that's how I give birth.
And you don't hold back, even if it's the negative, or even if it's that you feel like you're, going crazy at the end of your pregnancy, or you need to cry, we know and have served, I'm just going to speak for you here because I'm sure you didn't escape it either. So many women are so, taught to be so reserved. And, I've been with women who wouldn't even make a noise in labor, which is mind boggling to me, and actually very sad to me, and that, again, and you're bringing it back to this project, it's so cool that you're putting yourself out there in this way for women to witness, because it's not this composed, I don't know, like maybe what people would think of you because you're so composed when you write, and all of this, but that you absolutely are a very wild woman that has a lot of courage to move with your energy, and that it's not all pretty and bright, it's wild, and that's what women need to see.
Yeah, no, definitely, and birth is it just
Right.
is wild.
Birth is fucking wild.
Birth is really pretty nuts.
Okay,
and
so you're super pregnant.
I'm super pregnant.
You're in the pottery barn.
I've given up. I'm about. No, I didn't even get to the pottery barn.
Okay.
Emily, I really didn't. I'd given up though, and I was like, okay, I'm not having a baby. It's fine. I'm just going to go out and get some work done. And I think it was partly like enough drama. Forget it. No baby. And I had actually changed my shirt, and I'd put on a shirt that I often wear in the pottery studio, and it was just as I'd had this sort of sense of calm and like composure. Quite literally in that moment, another sensation kind of racked my body, and this time it was a little bit different. And I just knew in that second that well, I knew, but I also continued to second guess myself. So I had this very intense sensation, and it just felt so different. It felt so strange, and I said to my kids, like, I don't know what's going on. I think this might be it. And they almost rolled their eyes because they'd been hearing this for weeks and weeks. And I went over to sit on the toilet, and I wiped, and there was blood on the toilet paper, and I really thought, this has to be it. And I called Lee up, and all the kids came in, and over the next couple of hours, the sensations became more intense, and I lost some mucus and some blood. But even in that context, at 43 weeks and a day, lose like blood and mucus coming out of my vagina, I was still saying to everybody, like, I don't know, like maybe this really isn't it. And I had at that point kind of gone into that sort of, you just become a little bit, I don't know. I was in a different zone already, even while I was still second guessing myself. And yeah, and I kind of, this went on for a couple of hours, this sort of, limbo state where, I knew something was happening, and the feelings were intense, but I still was second guessing myself. But then I started to think, okay, this is it. This is really going to happen. And so I guess the baby's going to be here any moment. And I had really fallen into that trap of applying the rationale of time to this experience that kind of occurs outside of any of those structures. Like it really can't be when you start to think about how long you've already been in it or how much longer you're going to be in it. It's just very dangerous territory because it can get so discouraging. It's such a recipe for disaster.
And it's part of the many ways we are trained to upper limit our experience, right? Like it's one of the quickest ways in our heads to convince ourselves that things shouldn't be what they are.
Right, exactly. Quantifying any aspect of the birth process. And it's interesting too, because, I write a lot about, all of these procedures and processes that are part of the industrial obstetric model that are so incredibly counterproductive. So, for example, the cervical exam, is one of those things that, is a standard feature of prenatal care and of the birth process itself. I think, in many hospitals, women have their cervixes measured, every half hour. It's even standardized to the point that it's administered within a certain time frame throughout the process. And so, I reject all those models. I'm above all that sort of, but not really, because during this birth, as I'm, screaming and crying and, and all of that happened too. I was very weepy in these first early hours of the birth, but there I was also, like, I kept shoving my hand up my vagina to like figure out where the baby was,
right?
Like, and it's not quite the same as a cervical exam, but it's very similar. I'm constantly assessing and
I mean, at least you're doing it yourself. At least, and we can get to this later too. But I want to make sure to kind of ask you to speak on, how did you come to generate the courage to carry your babies, so late, where the rest of the world would say you need to induce and you need to, how did you overcome the hurdle of aligning with that you do carry your babies in what is considered in the mainstream culture to be way outside of bounds of what's appropriate or safe? How did you kind of wrap your head around that?
Oh, no. I mean, I didn't come to terms with anything or wrap my head around anything. I really was so incredibly lucky just to have had a birth attendant during my first pregnancy who understood the facts and was able to present to me information that helped me to understand intellectually how birth works, first of all. So, Gloria LeMay, who was my my birth attendant during my first two babies' births, as well as my teacher and mentor, and she educated me while I was pregnant with that first baby. But all of the education she provided me meant nothing, and I was beside myself and going nuts. And she, if not for her, I'm sure I would have just gone to the hospital. Like, please cut my baby out of my body. I can't do this. She insisted that I don't want to say she forced me to do anything, because she really didn't, but,
she normalized it.
She normalized it for me. But no, it wasn't even that. It was like, she really, at the end of my pregnancy, she had to have some severe discussions with me over the phone saying, look, you're going to wreck your birth. If you don't calm yourself down and wait, this is not going to work for you. And I'm so grateful for that. It was really absolutely true. And it's her voice in my head that I hear, now, almost 20 years later, as I'm pregnant with my 8th baby, having the same, breakdown. And it is scary, again, because of all that cultural baggage, but also because as mammals, near the end of our pregnancies, we need to get our babies out. It's that there's a physiological, biological kind of effect of having these increasingly heavy infants inside our bodies. And I think the design is that we're so desperate to give birth at the end of pregnancy that that's part of what fuels the hormonal cascade that allows birth to proceed normally. So no, I mean, it's still very hard for me even now. So I totally understand women who choose induction, because if you don't have that foundation of education, if you don't have support, and if you don't have community, and if you don't have people around you who are, on your side, who understand birth, it's almost impossible, I think. Things got more intense, and I started, I don't know, just screaming, and really just screaming. I'm a big screamer, and it was just very hard. The physical sensations felt excruciating, and I felt like I was gonna die. I felt like I kind of wanted to die. It was so, so hard. And
how long was the whole birth?
Well, it felt very, very long, and compared to my recent births, it was quite long. So from the moment that I had that first sensation that told me things were different, it was about 5 hours. And so the last 2 hours of the experience were me pushing. And this birth was so similar to my very first birth and so different from all of the births that came after, because all of my more recent births involved, a kind of a bit of a birth process with, some intense sensations. And then I would have a couple, like maybe 2 or 3 pushing sensations. And then the fetal ejection reflex would just completely take over my body, and my baby would be expelled.
Oh my gosh.
And I was expecting that to happen in this case as well, and it just didn't. And I pushed for, a good 2 or 2.5 hours with this baby.
So what do you mean when you say that? Like when you got to the point where, like, how, if you didn't have the fetal ejection reflex, how did you know? It sounds like you were kind of pushing. Like how did you navigate that? You just knew that it was time to do it and the baby was there?
Well, yeah. So my water broke about 2 hours before the baby was born. And in previous births for me as well, my waters had released often just prior to the baby coming out. And so I was kind of expecting, again, that this would follow that pattern. And when my water broke on the bed, it was just mud. It was it was meconium. And again, that's something that has a lot of symbolism in our culture. Meconium-stained amniotic fluid can also be associated with a baby that's having some issues.
But you're also 43 weeks.
And I'm also 43 weeks pregnant. So, all of those things together,
to be expected, I would imagine.
Are normal, I think, very normal, but also possibly related to issues. Anyway, I wasn't too concerned about seeing the water that would stain with meconium, but I also recognized that, that I interpreted that as a sign that my baby was about to be born, and that my baby really probably needed to be born relatively soon. And so that's also when I kind of started to feel the pushing sensation. But it just kept going on and on. It wasn't 10 minutes later. And again, part of that was that I was sort of stuck in this assessment mode. But as it continued, and as I kept pushing like I was pushing out my very first baby, which in my case was just excruciating, immense effort, like actively pushing like my life depended on it, just desperately pushing, just this incredible output of, not only physical labor, but, emotional and mental exhaustion, really. I just kept getting more and more sort of agitated internally, and more afraid, and nothing was happening. And I kept putting my hands on my vagina, and I could feel the baby's head, but it felt so far away. And, that's another thing about being a woman who's had many babies, is that it is actually often very normal for the baby to stay fairly high up in in the birth canal prior to emergence, but somehow psychologically, like feeling my baby like a whole hand away was just, it was very hard to deal with.
And right there, I mean, that's kind of the whole point that I love about your story, that you have all this wisdom, you have all this experience, you're a birth worker, you know that, and obviously I've only had one child, but I had a similar experience in my birth where I just forgot everything that logically I knew. And I just couldn't make sense of what was happening. But I promise you, if I had been an attendant at that birth, I would have been like, babe, this is literally the most normal thing I've ever seen. And so, yeah, same thing. I mean, how many women text us, oh, the baby's so high, but I'm pushing, I don't know what's going on. And then 5 minutes later, the baby's born, so
Yeah.
it's, I want to just point that out because it's one of my most favorite parts of your story, that and the Through the Veil, course that you made, that you don't get out of this, that birth just does something and works you on such a deep level that it's so new every freaking time. And it's very hard, if not impossible. In fact, it's counterproductive to try to apply, all this like logic to it, because we're actually like unable to a lot of the time.
Exactly. Yeah. And it is really counterproductive. And I was definitely doing that. And in a similar way to, kind of having to get over even the idea of having a baby in order for my birth process to begin, the same sort of thing had to happen for me to, in the end, give birth. So, there I was pushing and straining and just, and another thing too, my husband was right there with me, and I was desperate for his presence. I felt like, I just felt so terrified and so vulnerable, and like I needed him. I needed him there like I have never needed anyone before at any point. And like, even if he sort of shifted his body or like reached over to, I would be like, no, don't go. Please don't go. I need you here. It really was quite pathetic. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but just like very.
And how, I wonder how that is. I'm like picturing being Lee and having, you've had all these children with him, and then you're really scared and you're really, clingy or really needing him. Did he ever relate to you if that felt scary to him?
Well, certain parts of the birth were scary to him. I'll mention that in a couple minutes. But at this point, when I'm in the pushing stage, um, I was expressing all of this to him verbally as well. So, even in the video, there's segments of the video and part of the video that I share in Through the Veil, where I'm saying to him, like, God, I don't think I can do this. Like, I just can't do it. Like, I'm too scared. I'm scared. Like, I can't handle it. I'm terrified. Like, please help me. You've got to help me. Begging him to help me. And yeah, I can imagine that for him as my support person, that would be, I'm not sure. I mean, hard, perhaps, very hard. But Lee is very stoic, and he's a very steady presence. Like,
and it ain't his first rodeo,
and it's not his first time around. No, and I have a way of birthing. Yes, this birth was quite different for me, but my attitudes and responses are similar.
Yeah, because you share the audio of Zan's birth in a podcast that you did for your Housewife podcast. And it's pretty intense. It's definitely like screaming for help and, screaming for him to help you. So I guess that's true. It wasn't, even though this was a very different birth and you might have been feeling more fear than with Zan's birth, maybe if you're just hearing it, maybe it wasn't all that.
That's true. Actually, that's really interesting. I think all of my births would probably come across to a viewer or a listener as very similar, but I remember sharing Xanthi's, or maybe it was Felix's birth video somewhere, and someone wrote to me and said, I just watched your birth video. Thank you so much for sharing it. So generous of you. And I felt so bad for you because clearly you were in the most excruciating pain of your life. And I got this message and just thought, what on earth is she talking about? I loved that birth. Like, I felt so great through the whole thing. But yeah, it looks excruciating. But I felt it that way during this birth. And I was begging Lee for help and, asking God for this or that.
I wanted you to speak to, I noticed in the photos, and obviously I've seen the video now, that you seem to have chosen to be on your back. Can you speak about that a little bit?
I did, yeah. So at first, during the pushing stage, I was up on my knees and kind of upright on my hands and knees, and that's how I usually give birth. But at a certain point, I think one of the sensations was just so mind-blowingly, just otherworldly excruciating that I kind of collapsed backwards, and I was sort of resting between my sensations on my back, and then the sensations began again, and I wasn't able to get up. Like, at one point, I tried to get up, and I couldn't. And I think that's also when I had this experience of just the sensations were, and this is funny, I've always avoided using the word pain to describe birth sensations because I feel that they're kind of in a separate category, but God, this was painful. It was painful. It was so painful that I actually dissociated from my body. Like, I really left my body, and
During
it
the
was almost
pushing?
during this pushing, and I was almost like I couldn't it was so impossible for me to, like, survive. I felt like I couldn't survive it, and I just had to go, and in some ways, like, lying on my back was the only way that I could, like
Mm.
like, I had no control over my body. So at one point, I remember I tried to get up, and that's when I sort of fell back down and then left my body. And
Mm.
I wasn't able to control my body to get up again. And,
But in a way,
and that
couldn't we call that also like the point where you deeply surrendered?
Yes, exactly. I think I had to get to that point in order for my baby to emerge, but it wasn't so much as an emergence as like I felt in this sort of disembodied state, like my head was over there and my body was over here, and I don't know, I just felt this strange, this like I had forgotten too that I was even having a baby. Like, I was just like I was dying. I felt like I was dying,
Mm.
and I'd given up, you know, and and then I felt this weird sort of rubbery feeling. Like, it really was like, what the hell is that
Wow.
rubbery thing between my legs? Like, I didn't even understand it. I was so out of it. And then I had to sort of say, like, yo, that's you giving birth. Like, I had to kind of remind myself that there was
Mm.
something going on here. And I put my hands down between my legs, and I felt my baby's head, but even as the baby's head was crowning, like, it 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 wasn't just emerging the way that all of those other babies had, you know? It was kind of it was just inching out, and so I
Mhm.
remember putting my hands between my legs and, like, opening my vulva myself and just, like, trying to get it out, and I remember that phrase in my head, like, "Get it out." At one point, I think I said to Lee, "Just, like, get it
Get it
out."
out.
Just get it out, and I was clawing, like, clawing at my yoni,
Mm.
and I just couldn't, like, I felt like I couldn't, like, I had no leverage, like, it wasn't coming out, and I was absolutely hysterical and frantic, but I'd stopped screaming at this point, so I
Mhm.
was like, there was sort of like, there were all these different layers going on in my psyche. So on one hand, I was calm, but then internally, I felt like I was freaking out completely,
Mm.
and I also felt like the baby was stuck. There was a very strong feeling of stuckness, and I did know that in order to make things move, that I had to move. So
Mm.
I couldn't lift my body up, but it almost felt like I was trying to sort of levitate from my belly. So I was like arching backwards on my back. And then I lifted my leg at one point, and I instructed Lee to pull on my leg. But I realize now that, like, he didn't know what, like, pull? Like, how do you, like, what
Yeah.
way? It made no sense. So he had my leg in the air, and then I had my other, dear friend who was there kind of like pulling on my leg the other way. And then finally the head emerged, and I could feel that the head had come out. but it still felt incredibly uncomfortable. And I could finally breathe. So I remember like panting at that point once the head emerged, but then still feeling like things were stuck. It was just so weirdly difficult.
Well, and it was like he almost wasn't participating. It seemed like in watching, obviously you know better than I did because I've only seen the video, but it seemed like you really had to birth him. It wasn't like he birthed himself like so many babies do. Does that feel true?
It does. And what happened next really illustrates that, because finally his shoulders, he rotated, or his body rotated, and his shoulders emerged, but he was born to his belly button. And he stayed that way for a few seconds. And at that point, I was just like, there was sort of like this like calm, conscious part of me that's just sitting there, just going like, "What the fuck is this? Like,
Yeah.
what is this? This is ridiculous." And so finally, I again clawing at his body to try to get him out, and then finally, this thing came out of me. It wasn't a baby in my head at that point. I was just like, I just needed to be free of this. It's
Just like wet fish.
Just this terrible thing to say, but like it really felt like I had just I'd completely lost track of what the purpose of all of this was. So
I mean, it doesn't sound terrible. It sounds really primal.
It was very primal. It was very real. It was just so real, and I had to get it out. And finally, it came out, and I felt this sense of physical relief, and I just lay back, and I kind of like I think it was really only a matter of seconds, honestly. It was not, and you can't really perceive this in the video very well at all because it's so quick. But in my mind, like it could have been, I could have slept for like 5 hours. I think I might have almost blacked out for a moment, just in just sort of shock and relief. And I kind of came to because I heard Lee's voice, and he was saying, "Yo, get your baby." He's tapping me.
Yeah.
Get your baby. Get your baby. And his voice was so like, he's very quiet all the time. And it's almost like, especially if there's an emergency or something that needs an immediate response, Lee gets even more calm. So it was like, get your baby. Get your baby. But just the subtle kind of intonation of his voice, like the lilt in his voice at the end of that sentence, right away I was like, oh, what's going on? Like, why is he saying this to me?
Really? Oh, I have goosebumps. Because in the video, it's very quick, like you just said.
So quick in the video, I know, but it really, like, I think I would have just gone to sleep. I left. I was gone, and I'd never had that experience before, actually.
Wow.
Never in any of my births.
That's intense, yo.
It was tense. I've always felt totally clear and completely engaged immediately upon birthing all of my other babies.
Wow.
And this baby, I was out, and Lee had to wake me up. And I remember sitting up and looking between my legs, and there was the baby was not breathing at all when I looked up. And yet I didn't experience any fear. Like all of the fear that I'd had leading up to the birth, through the pregnancy, during the birth itself, the fear was gone. I remember feeling really, really curious. Like, oh, the baby's white and not breathing. And then I said, "Wake up, baby." Just like that. Like, and actually that part's in the video too. And like, my voice is very kind of clear and almost curious. Just wake up, baby. And I kind of felt the baby. I put my hands on the baby. And then without thinking, I just picked him up and put the baby on my chest. And that's when he woke up, and he gave a little cry. And at that point, I started to cry. And then it was almost immediately after that I started to shake and sweat, and I was absolutely in complete shock. And it was this amazing kind of totally intermingling feeling of of just trauma. Like I felt traumatized. I felt totally shocked. My body felt absolutely wrecked. I felt pain actually. Like after that sort of like bubble of like, oh my goodness, I had a baby and you don't feel anything. I did actually start to feel a lot of pain right after that. But then also just complete euphoria. Like I was so happy. I was so relieved. I was so completely in love with this amazing little baby who had kind of come to life in front of my eyes. And again, this was the first time I'd ever had that experience. All of my previous babies, even my very first baby, which that was it was like a 50-hour long birth and 7 hours of pushing. He was born pink and screaming. So, and I've seen all of those. I've seen the whole spectrum as a birth witness as well. I mean, I saw a woman, I witnessed a woman push for over 14 hours quite seriously with the baby sitting crowning on her distended perineum for 5 hours. I'm not making this up. And during that birth as a witness, I was like, this is not going to be good. Like I'm probably going to need to call 911. I was worried that the baby wasn't going to be born alive. And that baby tumbled out pink and screaming. And so I've seen all of these various configurations, but in my own births, it never crossed my mind that my babies wouldn't be born with like 10-10 APGARs. So it was really a shock, but I was so, so relieved and so ecstatic um, and in so much excruciating pain afterwards. And it was incredibly, incredibly intense.
Both of your spirits like weren't in this realm together, and then it's so beautiful and kind of symbolic that when he gets brought to your chest, which didn't happen immediately, that was kind of when you both came to, and he starts to cry and you start to cry and you start to come back into the room and come back into your body and start to have this wide variety of feeling and experience. It like, as you tell the story, it really, even with the birth and how kind of strange it was, and how you wound up not being able to get up and laying on your back and doing all this pushing, and then he just kind of falls out white, and it just seems like you guys both kind of traveled somewhere, whether it was together or not, but the coming back together, it's so cool. And you really see it in the video. Like you both came back into your bodies together.
Yeah, that's so true. And I just feel like there is so much amazing richness for me to work with in this birth. And I really haven't figured it out. I almost, I've kind of been I put off for a while writing his story, and I felt a little anxious about doing this chat with you because I really haven't figured it out. And I don't know if there is anything to figure out, if there's any way that I'll ever be able to, verbalize or make sense of what happened. But it was a very, very strange and interesting and profound and really very moving journey. And, what I think struck me afterwards, especially, was how grateful I am that I experienced that birth the way that it was at home and with the people around me that I'd chosen to be with me, because I know sadly from experience that that kind of birth where the baby is not born responsive in any institutional setting, or even often with midwives, very well-meaning midwives at home, the response would have been so, so very different from what it was in our case. And I'm so grateful that no one touched him, that no one did anything, that no one cut the cord immediately and went off to deep suction him in the corner of the room, which is, a standard response.
In the home birth setting, if a midwife had been there believing she needed to hero, this experience with kind of a funky pushing stage and you on your back kind of leaving, energetically leaving the body, there's something when we talk about experiencing trauma in birth from a physiological, experience, the fact that nobody took anything from you guys, that you did go through this underworld kind of, almost dark experience together, but that nothing interrupted what happened next, and the coming back together and meeting each other back in this realm, that was totally undisturbed. I mean, that's how you've been able, I would say, to move forward into what I've witnessed to be a very blissful and euphoric and powerful postpartum, which could have been so easily taken and confused, if you hadn't have gotten the normal, mother baby pause and coming back together, and him crying on your chest and you being the first one to speak to him, and the power of the story that you looked down at this little white thing and said, "Wake up, baby." And that stuff very rarely gets to happen in the presence of medical midwives, because they are trying to hero the whole situation. And your story is such a good reminder that nothing needed to be heroed, and that you guys kind of got to have this complete circle of coming back together on the outside.
It's so true. And, I see that kind of heroing taking place even in free births with overzealous partners and, doulas or friends who, want to, again, who have the best of intentions, but who, don't necessarily understand that kind of transfer of life almost
Yeah.
that can sometimes need to happen. And after the fact, I spoke with I had 3 actually women friends who were there helping to juggle our kids. It's all in the video. And I spoke with those 3 friends, and I talked to Lee as well. And I asked them how they received the experience, how they interpreted it. And they all basically said that, yeah, they thought the baby was dead, and they all were thinking to themselves, like, she needs to get up and get her baby. We don't want to step in. We know who she is, we know we know how she feels about all this, but like, give it another couple seconds, and if she doesn't, we're going to maybe want to do something. And I'm just so grateful that no one did, that I was given that space to experience the birth as it was. And another thing that this really reinforced to me too, Emily, which I think is really important, is that in the absence of an underlying condition or, a serious complication, like some kind of accidental cord compression, what have you, even babies that are born without good color, white, non-responsive, their lifeline is their umbilical cord. So if that's left alone, they're still receiving blood and oxygen from the cord. And, we're just so well equipped to tolerate the birth process. And, you and I were talking about this before too. And, I see lots of birth videos too. And again, this is so personal. I don't want this to be taken as, any kind of judgment or something that should be applied to all births across the board. But I've been asked actually why I didn't give my baby breath during those first couple of moments. And
Because he didn't need it?
really, it's because he just didn't need it. Like,
Yeah.
I think if, it is fully, in my experience, it's well within the realm of normal for babies to require a few seconds or, a minute or two of space just to become acquainted with the outside world. I mean, they've done this incredible journey themselves. And, that's how birth is designed. Birth is designed to allow for, allow for babies to kind of compose themselves, to organize themselves.
Lots of babies are born at home that I've witnessed are born quite stunned and not breathing.
Yeah.
And within 5 minutes, they're pink and screaming and breathing and crying. And so, obviously, my daughter was also born very stunned, very floppy, somewhat white. And yeah, I didn't feel inspired to give her breaths either. It just seemed totally normal. And it wasn't like we were talking about 5 minutes in, knowing that she very much has a lifeline and that nothing's going to interrupt that. So I guess the last piece I'm wondering is, I wanted to circle back to this idea of you sharing with our community that you didn't in fact have an undisturbed birth or a physiological birth. What does that mean to you? What part was disturbed and what part wasn't physiological?
Yeah, I mean, this is such a complicated thing. I think mostly, I think I just disturbed myself. I think I was, that sounds like a
Does
funny,
that count?
I don't know. I don't know if that counts, but on top of that, this was a birth experience where I had 3 friends with me, all of whom were absolutely wonderful. Um, they weren't actively, disturbing me, but I talk about this a lot too. Anyone who's there witnessing a birth is going to affect the atmosphere and the environment, and is going to have an impact on how that birth plays out. And just simply having people there,
and then it's like, can it even be undisturbed if you're filming and taking photos? There's
oh my
something
gosh,
inherent, to knowing you're being observed by cameras and video, that I wonder. Yeah, it's kind of just like, it doesn't even really matter, I guess. But then what is an undisturbed birth? Like, can you only do that alone? Like, where is that? Where is the line?
I don't know. I don't think there really is a line, and I think it's. I don't. I don't. I love that we're talking about this, and I think it's important to talk about it, but not in order to kind of categorize anything or anything like that. I just think it's a useful conversation because I think that the more that we talk about this stuff, the more women can actually make active choices as to how they want their births to be. And I know that having cameras set up definitely affected the experience for me. And there is something to be said for really protecting your space as much as possible and ensuring that you're in the dark, that the people who are around you are only your most intimate family members. And I had bright lights, I had cameras, I had 3 people outside of our family, people who I love and feel close to, but they're not part of our immediate family. And I had my 5 older kids running in another room, jumping all over me. Um, offering me their delightful and often very irritating love and support throughout. And I think all of that contributed to the length of the birth and the way that the birth played out. And
Have any of your previous children, could you classify any of your births as like truly undisturbed?
I don't know. I mean, it is a hard question because I do think that probably my own births have all been far less disturbed than a lot of
Totally.
births out there. And again, it's not it's not a question of superiority whatsoever. I just think that it's important to, again, be really honest about birth because it's not really personal. It really is a biological process, and we know from having an understanding of the science and physiology of birth that lights are not just an aesthetic difference,
Right.
for example, right? Lights have a profound physiological effect on, how our nervous system functions and, whether or not our body is able to produce the kind of hormones that will allow a baby to, allow the fetal ejection reflex, for example, to take place. So, it's important to me to talk about my own births in this manner because I get confronted all the time with women who feel really personally insulted, I think, by this sort of assessment of how a birth works. And I just want to be an example of, it's not personal. It's fine with me to acknowledge that no, the birth wasn't undisturbed. The choices that I made contributed to, maybe the length of time that it took for him to come out.
Well, every choice you made contributed to everything, right?
Yes.
So for sure. I mean, choosing to have 3 people there, cameras, your kids, all of that created what became your birth experience. So duh, right? That's not bad. That's just every choice we make contributes to the results that happen. Absolutely. And we can't act like they don't. However, I think it's absolutely imperative that we make a very clear distinction for the women listening to this conversation, of what is a disrupted birth when a stranger, or a hired, midwife or whatever wants to do a vaginal exam on your back when that wasn't in your flow, or somebody not honoring your space and coming in the middle of a wave and asking you a question or turning on the light. Those feel very obviously part of a disruption of a physiological experience when the mama wants to be introspective and wants to be in her bed and wants things to be quiet, to have what you and I, well, certainly me, because I've served women in the system so much. I don't know if you've seen it too much, I guess maybe with partners, with this kind of disconnection and dishonor of the space. That to me feels like a very obvious distinction of where a birth gets disrupted versus, I don't think we really need to go too far into when it's a family-centered, mother-led birth and you're surrounded by your children and you want your children there and you want these 3 women there. That feels very different to me if we're going down this road of what is disrupted. It's like, okay, well, everything's disruptive, right? If you're not like by yourself in the dark with nothing happening, a disrupted but still mother-led integrated family birth of your choosing and of your making, that feels like a really important distinction to make than an authority saying it's time for me to assess your cervix with my fingers, get on your back, or it's time for me to do Doppler you while you're, traveling the freaking underworld in your birth tub. Those are hugely different kind of ways to quantify a disruption.
Thank you. Absolutely. And I think what I think you're talking about, what you're talking about in my mind is power.
Yeah.
And this is one of the reasons why I will never use the word empowerment seriously, because empowerment is when women kind of reframe these experiences of being subjected to an outside authority, so that we can make it sound and feel nice. Whereas power is actually objective. And during my birth with Ignatius, I definitely had all of the objective power.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, no one infringed on my space at all. No one touched me if I didn't want to be touched. No one talked to me if I didn't want to be spoken to. I was initiating everything that completely honored and respected exactly. And
that is the gold standard. That is when we, in my mind, when we talk about, we said it at the beginning of this show, I think we see in our community and we kind of, it feels to me like people think that free birth is this gold standard, like perfect outcome to achieve or to get. And I would say no, because I've seen plenty of free birth sabotage. I've seen plenty of free births not actually centering the woman and the woman holding the objective power. And to me, if there were to be a gold standard of what we're trying to talk about and protect, it is the woman, emerging from her birth, looking back on her birth, going, yes, I was honored, I was respected, I was kind of at the top of the producer of the show. No one was there that I didn't want there. Nobody, nobody took anything from me. Nothing happened.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that's an interesting, yes, but we hear that a lot from women who are giving birth in the hospital, and I fully accept and appreciate that many women choose to give birth in the hospital, but I would argue that it's not possible as a birthing woman to actually have objective power in the hospital environment because the system doesn't allow for that. I definitely was the authority in the experience, and I think that's evidenced by the fact that even when my baby was born, you know, um, non-responsive, I was still given the space to take care of that situation the way I saw fit, which I really appreciate so much. And you're right, absolutely. I do connect the fact that my postpartum with him has been so amazing and so blissful with the kind of birth that I was fortunate enough to have, and that's despite the fact that, oh my goodness, I had the most horrendous hemorrhoids. I had pelvic floor prolapse. I had like a whole bunch of really gnarly physical issues after his birth. But even despite that, um, my emotional experience mothering him during his first couple of months has been just out of this world amazing.
And I think we can't ignore or avoid the fact that nothing was taken from you.
Right.
Right. And so, especially in kind of a funky birth with a baby born relatively lifeless, with a mama who, maybe for the first time, like checked out of her body and took a while to come back to, especially in a bit of a funky birth, the fact that nothing was taken from you, I think allowed for, the normal cycle of bonding and bliss and euphoria that came afterwards. Um, and this gets into, and of course, we'll talk so much about this in our Radical Birth Keeper training, how to hold space without taking, and without God, just the long-term harm that, like you said, well-meaning midwives and partners, can cause in this mother-baby, really intense, sometimes underworld kind of dark situation, delivery and birthing together. Um, and it's a conversation for another time, but just how many women share with us that they're um, that the midwives, stole that moment from them, and the grieving that happens around that. And if, how many, I mean, we can't even handle it on Instagram. How many gloved hands are, like, I saw one the other day. This is like this totally normal water birth with this baby just slipping out. And the mom is just totally chill, just her arm, legs open, and she's watching her baby emerge. She's sitting back against the, edge of the tub. And then there's just these like awkward gloved hands kind of coming in the side to just guide the baby out of the mother and up to the mother. It was like, it's the most unnecessary shit I have ever seen in my life. And I think I might have sent it to you. And obviously we see these all the time. And it's like, can you really, as that midwife, can you really explain to me why those hands needed to be there? Like, because there's no good reason when we're honoring and understanding mother baby, and just that little piece of that, the mother's story is going to be that the midwife took the baby, and put the baby up on her. And so the mama didn't get to experience that really important piece, of bringing the baby up and assessing the baby herself and being the one, that the baby goes from inside to outside.
Absolutely right. Being given, being allowed to have that space to encounter my baby, to be the person who encounters her baby.
So
That's
important.
so precious. It's so important. And you're absolutely right. I almost never, there's just, it's constant. The stream of images and imagery and videos of completely interfered upon totally unnecessarily, exactly heroed, is just, it's really, really difficult. I just went off earlier today on Instagram about the same sort of thing.
There's definitely a spectrum, in the hospital. It's what we would, classify as as on the spectrum of sexual assault, and it's way more intense and aggressive than the like awkward gloved hands that are just guiding this baby like a baby needs to be guided.
Like you just need to touch a little bit.
I just need to touch a little bit. Make sure that my gloved hands are in the photo, that are going to go viral, that anyway. And that's another part of why I love that you're sharing this, in Through the Veil, that your baby, it's an interesting delivery. It's an interesting birth. It's an interesting emergence with you kind of laying back and him just kind of coming out and kind of in a weird way, and nobody's there. I mean, obviously your husband's there, people are there, but nobody is catching, and I love that he's born actually just onto the bed. And we don't see a lot of those images of babies just being born onto the mat or onto the grass or onto the earth or onto the bed, like how we've done, forever, and is actually quite normal in many, undisturbed births, but we don't see a lot of images of that.
No, that's right. And actually, another thing, I love that, I specifically, with all of my births, my husband's number one job is to get the poo. Like, just get the poo. I just want you to get the poo, because I poop constantly while I'm giving birth, as most of us do. And so, he knows. He's been very well, I would say well trained. I don't mean that disparagingly. I am quite serious. Like, I have trained my husband to be an excellent traditional birth attendant. He's a fantastic traditional birth attendant. Yeah. He doesn't say a word. He doesn't speak unless he's spoken to and requested to speak. He won't touch me unless I'm begging him to touch me or telling him what to do. And even during this emergence, he is there, like taking away the baby wipes from my bumhole, the baby wipes with the baby wipes, and he does not. He doesn't go near the baby's head, which is an inch away. It's like it's so respectful, and I appreciate it so much. And I'm so excited about our Radical Birth Keepers training course that we're initiating coming up, because I get messages from birth workers all the time, and they message me to, thank us for the work that I'm doing, that we're doing, and also to say, that they're desperate to learn an entirely new and different way of serving women, so that they are, in a position of leadership, but not authority over women, right? And there's such a different, there's such an important distinction there. I think, if we can be leaders as birth workers in our communities, then we can truly serve women without being authoritarian. And there's a difference too, I think, between being an authority in the birth process, but understanding birth and having some authority in terms of how to discuss birth and how to teach about birth and how to educate families about birth, versus assuming that we are an authority over a birthing woman, which should never, ever, ever be the case.
Well, and it's going to be so fun to use all of these tools that we've been really playing with around the drama triangle. And, we've mentioned the position of hero quite a bit in this conversation, and, that there's hero, victim, and villain, and that so much of midwifery and obstetrics and the medical paradigm in general is really committed to being below the line in the position of hero. And so, how to attend birth above the line, as Yolande and I's mentor would say, and what is the position? What is the reflecting position of hero, but above the line without an agenda? And that to me is the authentic midwife. That to me is, the lighthouse leader in your community. That to me is the coach or the teacher or, or even the guru. What does guru mean? To bring from darkness to light. And so, it's really exciting to use to really get clear for us of how to integrate those tools in a whole new model of loving and serving women, where, get this, everybody, shocker, the woman's actually centered. What? It's like, why is that so hard to find in a training? My God. But don't worry, everybody. We're creating it. It'll be available next year. Blah, 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 plug. Stay tuned.
That's right.
Okay. So thank you, first of all, for sharing that story. And it's awesome and so powerful. And I'm assuming that almost everybody that has heard this will be very piqued their interest will be very piqued to check out your course. So I'm sharing this episode on the week of you're publishing this course so that it can be available so that everyone hearing this can run over and buy it. Is there anything else that you want to share about the course that maybe we didn't touch on? And I always want to recap for everybody. It's a 3rd and 4th trimester companion course. So it's video based, and it takes the viewer from, is it 30 weeks?
I think so, yeah.
So from Yo being 30 weeks all the way through her 4th trimester, and it includes an incredible about 1.5 hour little documentary of her birth with her narrations over it. But as cool as that is, the video, you watch it week by week. So the idea could be really fun that when you hit around 30 weeks, you buy the course and you travel with her, and every week you get a video. And if you're just anxious to watch them sooner, you obviously can. And so you can skip ahead, or you can watch it in your 4th trimester and reminisce on your 3rd trimester with her. But the idea of this companion course that's video based, and you watch a video every week, and you travel with Yolande at the end of the pregnancy, and then you get to witness her birth, which is just incredible, and then get into her postpartum. And a lot of it is her musings and her experience and her wide range of emotions, as we talked about, but it's also practical stuff like how does she prepare, and about postpartum stuff, and there's quite a bit of very tangible, real, useful information, as well as this kind of emotional invitation to travel with someone who's very well spoken, as you guys all know, and really is willing to put it all out there. So in my mind, one of the beautiful offerings about this is, as we all know, it can be very lonely to have a wild pregnancy and to into birth outside the system, and it can be hard to find other women in your community who get it. And so obviously we get it. And so Yolande, as a leader of this, that she created something to help you not feel so alone, and that you are traveling with a woman who does this as an integrated part of her life, and as her as being a woman in this world with this family, that it's just a normal, integrated, and yet very wild experience. So is there anything else that you want to share about it?
No, that sounds right. That sounds great. I mean, it is very vulnerable, and I had to kind of ask myself, am I really going to be okay with this being out in the world? But I think it's important. It's important to me that that I share as much as I can, just the realness of birth. And I think perhaps there was a teeny little part of me at the beginning of the project that thought that maybe I would get to be, glamorous and adorable, and
You're totally adorable.
Well,
I don't know about glamorous.
It's definitely not glamorous. And I really wanted to be able to show just how raw birth really is, and how birth can look in the context of a family. Thank you.
Well, you totally nailed it. You did a great job. It's out now, so please go buy it and support Yolande and her work, and enjoy it, and feel all the wisdom, soak it all up. It's a really, really beautiful course that she's created. Thank you so much for being here and for sharing all of this. And I'm excited for all the women who enjoy your course.
Thank you, Emily. I love you. Thanks.
That's it for today, everyone. Join us next week for another episode of the Free Birth Podcast. Thanks for joining us, and remember, your body, your choice. Lots of love.